the second portion. Kol Torah, the whole Torah, Ketava Moshe Rabbeinu, was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, Kodem Sheyamut, before he died, Biktav Yado, by his hand, his own hand, he wrote it. Benatan Sefer Torah, Lechod Shevet Veshevet, and he gave a Torah scroll to every one of the tribes. Sefer Echad, and one Torah scroll. Netanachu be'aron la'ed, he placed in the Ark of the Testimony. Shenemar, as it's written, Lakoach et Sefer HaTorah Chazeh, take this Sefer Torah, Besamten oto mitzad, and place it next to Aron Brit Adonai Elohechem, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God. V'chaya sham b'cha la'ed, and it will be among you or in you as a testimony. And again, friends, here it's stating that everything or anything that man has to adhere to must revolve around Torah Shebiktav. And that's why it goes so far to remind us that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it with his own hand before he died. In other words, telling us that it's trustworthy. That this is our unshakable foundation, to the point that it even states that a copy was placed in the Aron, in the Ark itself. Now, this is something that we really can't say about many other Jewish books, or any of our Jewish canon, or the rest of our Jewish canon, apart from the 5 books of Moses. Why? Because we know that when a Sefer Torah was copied, there was a whole procedure set in place so no mistakes would be made and thus corrupt the foundation. And we know that this care was not taken when copying over the prophets or the writings, or obviously any later book nowadays that claims to have some sort of divine origin. So many books nowadays that have errors straight from the printers or the censors or the copyists. Again, friends, the 5 books of Moses is our standard, and everything else, even as it states here, is regulated to commentary. And friends, we have to ask ourselves, why is this message so important, especially today? Friends, it's clearly because today we work backwards. In other words, unfortunately, Lamaisa, in area of hierarchy, today we have elevated that mitzvah it's talking about here, what it tells us is the actual interpretation of the Torah above the Torah itself. Now you're probably thinking, how could a commentary surpass what it's commenting on? Well, easy, by adding tons and tons of works to the mitzvah, the oral law, which was never supposed to be there to begin with. So nowadays you have teachers using the words and teachings of later rabbis and also calling this oral law received from Sinai as their foundation, and only using Torah Shebiktav as its commentary. And even 90% of the time, they don't even do that. Again, as the Rambam is stating here clearly, here in his Hakdama to the Mishneh Torah, that the oral law, the mitzvah, only is the only commentary on Torah Shebiktav. And there's really no way around it. You're reading on. Vecha mitzvah, shechi perush ha-Torah. And friends, here again, it's stating again that it's the mitzvah that's the commentary to the Torah. This, what we're considering Torah Shabbat Peh right now. Lo ketava. And this, Moshe did not write down, it states. Eila siva, but he commanded Balaskinim, the elders, Yoshua and Joshua, Velishar, call Yisrael, and the rest of Israel. And friends, in contrary to the Karaites, who have always believed that from the day Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, the Israelites were just constantly engulfed with the task of trying to understand what Hashem required from them, from the literal meaning of the text, which, if you think about it, did not exist yet, or even trying to understand just from the voice that they heard from the mountain. Friends, Torah Judaism has always held that logically it couldn't have been, in other words, a society could never have successfully functioned in such a manner if any doctrinal unity was expected. In other words, the text and the narrative cries out for an explanation. So if you want to say that, wait, they weren't alone in their deciphering because they had Moses around them to explain or interpret any misunderstanding, then honestly, what's the big deal? You're still admitting that there was a need for an authoritative explanation. And that being said, do you still think that Moses would have just made it up? Of course not. The most logical response is to assume that Moses, being the man who heard the commands from God himself, perhaps by some divine way, God also explained how he wanted these acts to be performed properly. Because friends, the Torah itself shows that there were many instances that Moses did not know what to do. And it never shows him guessing, but rather going back to God for the explanation. So at least according to a narrative, we know that Moshe doesn't guess. Also, the idea that how could Moshe have received it from the Almighty? Okay, fine. That doesn't tell us how it actually happened. All we know is that when he came down from the mountain, he embodied, along with the commandments that were given to Israel, an authoritative set of ideas on how these commands were to be kept. And yes, the only way such interpretations could be expected to be followed is only by attributing them to a divine origin. Or then it would just be regulated only to opinion, and just as disposable as other opinions of men today. And honestly, this does not include the words of Chazal that we must follow because the Torah tells us. But anyways, I'll cover that later. Okay, reading on. Let me just read this portion quick, just because I stopped at the wrong place here. V'chamitzvah shechi perush Torah lo katava el siva bam laskinim v'liyeshua v'lishar kol Yisrael shenamar, as it is written, et kol hadavar asher anochi metzaveh etchem oto tishmeru lasot. And the whole word that I, God, am commanding you, you shall keep and you shall do. And friends, here's the kicker. Lo tosef alav velo tigra mimenu. And you shall not add to it or subtract from it. And friends, you have to know, this is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking, teaching us that one cannot even add to what is known as oral law that was received on Mount Sinai, the Halacha Moshe Sinai, which is why the Rambam writes in his Hakdama to his Parashat Mishnayot that regarding Halacha Moshe Sinai, one way we're able to distinguish it and separate it from regular rabbinic law is that you will not find any disputes regarding them by Chazal. In other words, unlike other rabbinic laws, they weren't subject to scrutiny, which opens us up to the notion that lo tosef alav also applies to these laws, the idea of not adding to them. So no one throughout history was authorized to say that any later work was also given on Mount Sinai. And friends, again, this is the exact same thing that's happening today. Now, you're probably thinking, how do we know that these oral commands, the ones that were received on Mount Sinai, and not the ones that were added today, how do we know that these also weren't just made up? I mean, someone could have said that this could have been a plot put together by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the codifier of the Mishneh, to, I don't know, mess everything up. I mean, that's a serious question. Because, friends, we know that it's the Court of 71, along with Torah pt2, that has always been the two constants throughout history that we could rely on. As a matter of fact, I have never seen any text ever showing us that the Court of 71 ever became corrupted. And remember, in order to corrupt such a court, you would need to corrupt at least 36 members, at least to be able to corrupt the ruling. But anyways, I'll cover this more in depth a little later. Okay, reading on. And this is why we call it Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay, Dalet. Afal pi, even though Sheloni Tava Torah Sheba'al Peh, even though the oral law wasn't written down, Limda Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe himself taught it, Kula Bebeit Dino, to the court, the Shiv'im Zekenim, the 70 elders. Eliezer, Upinchas, Yeshua, and Eliezer and Pinchas and Joshua. Sheloshtan Kiblu mi Moshe. These three received it from Moshe. Yehoshua and Joshua, Shechu Talmudo Shel Moshe Rabbeinu, the student of Moshe Rabbeinu, Mosar Torah Sheba'al Peh. V'tzivahu alecha, he gave him Torah Sheba'al Peh and instructed him on it. V'chein Yoshua kol yemei chayav limad alav peh. And Joshua, all the days of his life, taught this law.